What is up? Welcome back to another video. Today's video is probably going to be a very good example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. That, of course, refers to the idea that when you have very little understanding of a certain topic, you feel like you know everything about it, and then the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know. It's a graph. And I, like many others, have fallen victim to it many times in my life. The difference with today's video is this is a topic I know nothing about. I've watched half an episode of Law and Order. It was playing in the waiting room of like a auto repair center that I was at, kind of half watching it. Ice Cube, I think, was there. He said something weird. That's about my extent of understanding of today's topic, which is law. More importantly, antitrust law and things of that nature. And the reason we're talking about this, the reason I'm talking about this, I should say, is that recent news from Kodak has called into question some of their competitive practices. I don't think currently their actions are necessarily monopolistic. They do have quite a rich history of monopoly in their past, and I was aware of a few of their issues, so I decided to look into it a little bit, see if there was enough meat there to make a video. And boy howdy, whoa, hey. Ooh, there's a lot of stuff. So I'm gonna kind of break into it a little bit. The stuff I'm talking about, I might not communicate in the most effective way. You can check out all this information yourself. I will link the things that I've pulled up down below. A lot of this is just in the Kodak Wikipedia thing, but I want to make this video as kind of a consolidated list of some of the troubles that they've come across in their years of being a company. This isn't all of them. I kind of try to keep it to just the antitrust, anti-competitive practices, the ramifications of that. There is a considerable history, too, of issues with labor, including the hiring of people of other races. There was a strong push in the Rochester area for only hiring those of Anglo-Saxon descent. Anyway, there's a lot. I'm not going to get into that. It's a little bit too messy, and I didn't really read into it, so I would be speaking out of turn. I barely read up on this, so I'm just going to kind of keep it to the facts and paint maybe a bit of a picture to their past activities, and then contrast that with the current landscape. Because I don't really think that what they're doing currently is like anti-competitive practices or monopolistic. I think that the nature of the current landscape of film photography is just, it's difficult to get into. So I will begin here, then I will do that. Please enjoy. I do not want to be found liable for any of this. So we begin with the facts. The company has been around for a very long time. Eastman Kodak was incorporated in 1892. So yeah, it's been around for quite a bit of time, and it has been, for the most part, the most prominent established company in the photographic landscape, especially in America. Early on, they began as many companies were, kind of producing cameras and film, but they realized that you could make much more money just producing the film and not the cameras. That's something that does make a lot of sense, because people are always going to need to buy film, versus if you get a good camera, you can pretty much use that until it falls apart, and then you need to get another one. That's two investments over the course of X amount of years, but if you're regularly shooting film, that's something you're going to have to buy consistently. So it does make sense that they would do that. They also created kind of disposable systems. So you would buy the camera with the film in it, you would shoot that, and you would send the camera back to them. They would develop the photos, get those back to you, and then you'd have to do the whole process again. So you'd be buying the camera and the film and the processing fee all included with that cost. And because you're only going through Kodak, you can't buy the film and the camera from them and send it off to somewhere else to get it processed and developed, because I already paid all this money for Kodak to do it, so I'll just send it back to them. And you kind of had to. Which led us to the first one, and it came from none other than the federal government of the United States. And listen, if you're going to be indicted or at least investigated by anybody for anti-competitive practices, might as well just go big, especially in your first time out. Federal government, why not? So 1911, they began their investigation. A lawsuit was filed in 1913, and then a consent decree was agreed to in 1921, which was basically, from what I can understand, a quick shake of the hands, promise we won't do it again, and Kodak had to kind of alleviate some of their businesses, adjust their practices, kind of. I don't think that last bit I think was maybe written on like the end of the paper, and maybe at some stage that little end had been torn off because they quickly forgot that that was an agreement that they made. They, in fact, began developing and rolling out their color film in like 1930s, which was Kodachrome and color film processing that they kind of exclusively had rights to. A little bit of a spoiler alert. So they developed Kodacolor, which is the like first color negative film, so far as I can understand, and also the chemical processes in which to develop all of that. Fantastic. Just get your film from Kodak and then send it right back into them for them to develop. That worked out perfectly fine before. Oh wait, it didn't this time. In 1954, they were hit with another consent decree, which again I just think is like a quick little handshake. Oopsie, sorry, my bad. Barring Kodak from selling the color film with the processing combined. Now, I could be speaking out of turn, but I feel like this is what Seattle Filmworks did, and I need to look into that more before I like openly speak to that, but I think that's what they did. And basically what it's saying is like, if you're the only company that's providing color film and color film processing, then you are the only option for shooting color and for getting it processed and all of these things. Meaning that you can set the price at whatever you want it to be, and that's what it is. Too bad. 1954 consent decree, they were like, okay, we can't do that, and that opened up the market for other companies to rise to prominence. And many did. It was a great time to shoot film because it was the only thing you could shoot. There wasn't any digital cameras. They were about 20 years away from even being developed, so you were stuck with film. And one company that took advantage of this was Berkey Photo, which is a company based out of New York, similarly to Kodak. They have a very interesting history, Berkey does. I'm not going to get into it, but basically they, at some stage, I believe it was in like the early 1970s, they were one of Kodak's like main competitors. They were in fact producing more 110 and 126 film, which was a kind of championed cartridge film from Kodak, basically meaning you just pop it in the camera and then you can shoot. You don't have to worry about loading the film, blah, blah, blah. And it was very famous with the Kodak Instamatic line, which was the lowest cost camera for Kodak to produce because it's just a plastic box. And it was really marketed towards the average consumer because it was cheap to buy, it was cheap to shoot, and Kodak was just seeing this massive return on profits. A little bit similar to something like the modern day Kodak M35, except the Instamatic was, no, it's actually very similar to that. Anyway, so in 1973, the antitrust lawsuit was filed from Berkey being like, hey, Kodak is, again, trying to change the market so much to cut everyone out of it, thus we are losing money, blah, blah, blah. They provided all this evidence. It was a very long trial. I believe they won in like 1978, and they won a significant portion of money. It said initially 87 million, but the New York Times article I found said something more like 128 million. I'm not entirely sure, but the amount was awarded in treble damages, which is basically when the judge is like, hey, I see the money you're going to win, and we're going to double it and give it to the next person, except triple it and give it to you. Stupid. Kodak, of course, appealed that decision because they're like, hey, we don't want to spend like all of this money. That's a little bit ridiculous. We're just trying to like perform anti-competitive practices. What's the big deal? We've not done this before. And then the reward was reversed. So I'm not sure if Berkey got any money. I'd yet to see that information. It doesn't really matter because they went bankrupt like a decade later, which, cool. At the time that this was happening, there was also, let me see, I'm just going to read the quote directly from the New York Times. The panel ruled that Kodak received excessive benefits from its cooperation with the General Electric Company and the Sylvania Company in developing flash units for its pocket cameras. So that was another thing, that they developed these flash units specifically for their cameras, and that could be bringing companies from other industries in and using their knowledge, their established knowledge in that industry to benefit their system, make it much better than the alternatives, than their competitors, and they can do so because of their large market share. I don't know how much I ascribe that to increasing their value, but it is something worth noting. The trial was the first of 4 antitrust complaints filed against Kodak in 1973. The year after was introduced its revolutionary Instamatic pocket cameras, new film size, and chemistry. Kodak at the time was pretty much dominating the domestic market and had its sight sets on Agfa, which was in Germany, I believe. We then fast forward a few decades in the future. Kodak versus Polaroid. Polaroid developed the instant film, the idea of that. The start of this whole issue began when Kodak started producing some chemicals for Polaroid. And then Kodak was like, I want to get into this instant market because that's a market that I've not monopolized. that I've not participated in. So they started doing that, and they basically made cameras, but if I'm honest, they are butt ugly. And they came out with these like really cool bags though. The Kodak the Kodacolor bags? Kodacolor Instacolor, whatever. The bags are great. I have one. And the bag that I got actually came with the original paperwork telling the buyer of it how to get their money back, essentially, from Kodak, all this stuff. 1985 rolls around. Kodak is found guilty of infringing of 7 of the 12 patents that Polaroid accused them of infringing on, so the whole Kodak instant film thing just kind of washed away like tears in the rain or whatever. They had to pay a bunch of money to Polaroid. They had to pay a bunch of money to the people who invested in their system. And ultimately, it was a bit of a bummer. However, they still had the consistency of the motion picture market to fall back onto, and then also they had, again, a very large stake in, especially in the domestic consumer film photography market. That is until 1984, in which Fuji, which was a Japanese company, it still is, I don't know why I said past tense, but at the time, Fuji was a purely Japanese company, was trying to make moves into the American market with its cheaper film, cheaper processing, all of these other things, and more variety of offerings as well. They sought out the 1984 bid to sponsor the Olympics that was taking place in Los Angeles, which some of you might know is actually in America. And in fact, they won that bid. There was a lot of drama involved there because Kodak, being an American brand, not sponsoring an American Olympic, which I believe was like the first Olympics to take place in America in a considerable portion of time. I could be very inaccurate about that, but I feel like I'm kind of close to the mark there. Fuji sponsoring that Olympics means that they had gained a lot of notoriety within the American industry, and thus leading to their eventual competition in that market, which, as we might know from this video, Kodak does not really appreciate. Early 1990s, Fuji had about a 10% market share, and in 1997, that rose to about 17%. So virtually doubling their market share in under a decade is a pretty significant thing, and it definitely was eating out of Kodak's bottom line. However, they were still reaching these like massive profit margins despite the competition. All that was about to change in the turning of the century, because digital cameras were coming out and there was a very hefty interest from the general consumer into digital cameras. You're telling me I just have to buy this camera one time and I can use it till the cows come home. I don't have to pay Kodak any of my money to get new film. I don't have to worry about getting it developed, blah, blah, blah. It's just this thing and then we're done. Yes, that's the point of digital cameras. That's why they're popular. Obviously, the quality was significantly worse at the time than film, but that just goes to show how much more people prefer convenience as opposed to quality. Before that happened, though, it was kind of interesting because Kodak actually filed some sort of claim with the federal government, which was then sent to the World Trade Organization, that they were having a hard time getting into Japan because of Fuji's anti-competitive processes or whatever. January 30th of 1998, World Trade Organization was like, nah, dude, what are you talking about? So that got completely dismissed. Turn of the 21st century, they were both feeling that the flames on their heels of the incoming pressures of digital camera technology, which is funny because famously Kodak had developed the first digital camera in, I believe, 1972, and they were like, that's not going to take off. Again, going back to their very early realization that it's easier, more profitable to sell film as opposed to selling cameras. So they kept that mindset, arguably to their own detriment. Think of the world that we would live in if in 1972 they recognized the potential of digital photography and heavily invested in that market. How much things would have shifted. I don't even know what that would have looked like, to be quite frank. But instead they stuck with film. They had all these little competitions, blah, 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 and then they got completely blown out of the water, filed for bankruptcy, I believe 2012, because they tried very hard to pivot into digital stuff. That didn't work. And then also all of the companies who were producing film cameras were shifting over to digital anyways. So the idea that Kodak had, where it's like, we'll just produce the film, leave producing cameras to other people, that kind of started to fall apart because there were very few other companies producing film cameras, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so quick intermission. I'm in the process of editing this piece right now, and I realized that I actually missed a whole lawsuit against them, a whole monopoly case that was actually brought to the Supreme Court. There's a whole Wikipedia article on it, so I will link that down below. I recommend you check that out. I'll give a quick summary of it. It doesn't really fit into the film photography narrative. It does fit into a bit more of some of Kodak's more historically frugal business practices and what they define as their property versus others and what they feel like they have rights to in terms of profits and all that stuff. Basically, this lawsuit is Eastman Kodak Company versus Image Technical Services or something like that. It's from 1992, and essentially what it's saying is that Kodak was not allowing companies to source repair parts from other manufacturers unless they went through Kodak first and got Kodak's seal of approval. Kodak was essentially creating itself as the middleman for these independent companies that had Kodak, printers, copiers, all of those things. They couldn't get those parts directly, and maybe more affordably, they had to pay Kodak extra money to get them repaired and get the parts for them and stuff like that. The district court apparently dismissed the case. They appealed to the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit reversed the reversal of summary judgment. There's a lot of words here. I think the opinion was the Ninth Circuit, the Supreme Court affirmed the Ninth Circuit's denial of Kodak's summary judgment motion, reversing the district court. Justice Blackmun began by emphasizing some additional facts from the record that neither court below had relied on. Kodak did not make all of the parts that went into its equipment. It purchased parts from parts manufacturers as part of Kodak's policy to limit sales of replacement parts for micrographic and copying machines. I'm getting tired just reading that. You can read it for yourself if you'd like to, but basically another instance in which Kodak was creating a market and instilling itself as the primary financial benefactor of that market despite its relative lack of importance in that market. That's kind of the totality of the history. If we look at Kodak's current landscape, they are arranged in 4 business reporting segments: traditional print, digital print, advanced material and chemicals, including motion picture, and brand licensing of consumer products produced by third parties, such as the Korean clothing brand video that I made not too long ago. They had quite a bit of boom in the 2020, I believe, or 2021, with the federal government investing in them to produce chemicals for healthcare stuff or whatever. And as you may know, they are pretty much the sole producers of color film emulsions at this stage in time. Now, there is a few exceptions to that. If lucky, the film brand in China begins developing color film, then that's something. Harman, out of England, is producing a color film stock. Motec, I believe it is, which is the Wolfen Contingency in Germany that's producing color film. But again, that's very niche film, and I don't really view that as a substantial competitor to Kodak's offerings, because the thing that I've not really touched on, but I feel like is very, very important, is that outside of Fuji, there was really no other company that was producing motion picture film. That's actually a lie. Orwo produces motion picture film, and Agfa produce motion picture film. Agfa no longer does so. Orwo still does, but again, you know how I feel about that. So it's pretty much, at this stage, Kodak, which is producing all of the motion picture film for Hollywood productions. In 2016, I think it was, CEO of Kodak spearheaded this initiative with notable filmmakers such as Martin Scorsese, Quentin Tarantino, and others. I don't really remember exactly who else was on the list, but those two big names at the very least, to preserve the use of analog film, celluloid film, in motion pictures. And because of that, there's been a bit more of a resurgence in people electing to do that as opposed to digital. I've seen this recently in Anora, which is a popular film, I guess, that was released this year. It has received a lot of fanfare, and it was famously shot on Kodak motion picture film. Kodak at this stage has a monopoly, if that's what you want to call it, on motion picture film. However, I don't really think it's like a true monopoly, because if you look at that current industry, it's either you can shoot on film, you have to shoot Kodak, or you can shoot digital, which there is a litany of brands in which you could shoot on. A film such as The Creator was shot on a relatively affordable Sony FX3 or FX30 system, which anyone could get. In that sense, while yes, they do have the totality of the motion picture market, again, barring Orwo and whatever other companies are out there that have like some motion picture film, Kodak has the majority of the market and has ties with the industry in a way that no other companies really do. They're still the more affordable, in some cases more accessible digital option. Look at something like the recent news that they are going to no longer allow the selling of their motion picture film in bulk to companies for them to wash the remjet off and resell and stuff like that. I don't think that that's necessarily an anti-competitive practice. I think that the whole industry, and I felt like this from the get-go, it's very strange to me, because on one hand, we have, yes, a creation of all these other companies, and that's cool and all. We have more products, and that's cool and all, but it's all the same product, and it's really just a product from a completely different company. It really just seemed strange. If anything, I feel like the introduction of other companies was to compete with Cinestill, a company that's been producing that particular variation of a Kodak product since like 2012, and have pretty much had a grip on that industry and on the cultural zeitgeist of that film stock since the beginning, because they came up with it. More power to them. However, their product has always been very steep and expensive, and at times hard to come by. But about a year ago, Cinestill famously, allegedly, filed some kind of paperwork against Cat Labs and against other brands that were doing the Cinestill thing. Now, time has kind of smoothed the waters for a lot of people and tempered a lot of people's initial opinions on those practices and whether or not that was what happened, or whether or not Cat Labs just came out and said that that's what happened. I don't really know the whole truth, but I feel like Kodak's move to limit, if not completely bar, the selling of bulk motion picture film, more of an anti-competitive practice on the behalf of Cinestill. And it has nothing to do with Cinestill. I'm not saying that Cinestill was like, hey, Kodak, do this for us. I doubt that. I don't know what their relationship is like, but all I know is that that's the market which Cinestill competes in. And like I've mentioned before, companies like Reflex Labs and Flick Film, while they do produce the exact same product, and it's not their own product, the pricing of it and the accessibility of it is in direct competition with Cinestill. Because if you do want to shoot the Cinestill look, but you don't want to shell out the almost $20 for a roll of film, whatever it costs, you do have those companies where it's a bit of a fraction of the cost, it's the same product, yada yada. That's where I feel like that is a monopolist practice, but it's not even Cinestill doing it. One more quick intermission, because while I'm editing this portion of the video, I get a little bit murky in some of the word choice I use. I feel like my point might be getting a little bit lost, so I want to include this to make sure that what I'm saying is very clear and it's not getting misconstrued, and that I'm not stepping on any toes. Kodak's decision to no longer sell or like really cramp down on their sales of motion picture films could in some way be viewed as a anti-competitive practice. I don't actually think it is, because they don't have any products in that lineup. Of course, they do sell color film emulsions, and one could argue that by limiting the other amount of color film emulsions on the market, they're, would be limiting the sales to their products and whatever other films are on the market, such as the aforementioned Orwo films, some of the Lomo films, the Harman Phoenix films. Ultimately, the market itself, that Cinestill-esque market, was created by Cinestill. Other companies took advantage of what Cinestill was doing, introduced the exact same product, which is the motion picture film with the rimjet washed off, introduced their variation of that into the market space, thus adding competition to the market that, again, Cinestill created. So Kodak, thus no longer wanting to sell bulk motion picture film, which is entirely up to them because it's their product, they can choose who they want to sell it to and who they don't want to sell it to. Their choice to do that is not, in my mind, as a monopolistic decision. It's just a decision that they're making, whether they want to preserve that product or what have you. I think it's more or less their prerogative. But I don't think that those other companies were taking out a massive market share from Kodak's existing film photography space. I think that those companies were taking out the market space from Cinestill, which in my mind is a maybe separate market to some degree. So the point that I mentioned earlier, about a year ago, when Cinestill allegedly filed a cease and desist to Cat Labs, that could in some ways be seen as an anti-competitive practice, because Cinestill, to my knowledge, doesn't really have a patent on the process. And they have flagship the process, and they have the vast market share of that process, of that product. In totality, it exists because of the existing Kodak process of producing that color film. So, in summation, the news that Kodak is no longer selling those bulk films is likely going to affect the Cinestill market space in an anti-competitive manner, but I don't think that has anything to do with Cinestill influencing Kodak to make that decision. I don't think that Kodak made that decision with Cinestill's market space in mind. I just think that was a decision that was made, and the overall effects of that are going to ultimately benefit Cinestill more so than they would benefit Kodak directly. While Kodak is the main provider of color film in the modern market, they've not barred other companies from producing color film chemicals, processing chemicals, C41 kits, E6 kits. You can buy those from a variety of different companies, and Kodak has done nothing to dispel that from happening. If you buy Kodak film, you can develop it wherever you want to. You can develop it yourself. You can do whatever you want with it, which again opens the market up to competition, as it should be. Now, with something like their recent price raising or whatever, that's something that they've been doing forever. So far as I can tell, I mean, at least the past 10 years or so that I've been somewhat conscious of the film photography market, prices have fluctuated, gone up and down as the price of everything has gone up or gone down, mostly gone up if we're going to be completely honest here, but regardless. So that's not like, oh, they got us by the short and curlies and now they're jacking the prices up. That's not really what's happening. If anything, you could argue that the market in its current configuration is more competitive than it was a year ago, because even a company like Harman, which was heavily criticized by me and by others for Phoenix, which came out about a year ago, as being highly experimental and expensive, the cost on that film has lowered drastically, and the popularity of their 120 version of that film has risen drastically, leading more people to feel more positive about that brand and more positive about their inevitable next color project. Even a company like ADOX, which produced a color mission film, was receiving quite a bit of hype. and their more recent offering has yet to be released, but people are still looking forward to it to some degree. Companies like Orwo have their own color film line that people, iffy on, but a company like Lucky could potentially produce color film, and that would probably do quite well because people are just excited about shooting film regardless of the branding. Kodak, I feel like, is always going to have an established place in the film photography community by virtue of it being around for over 100 years in this case, and consistently putting out quality products. I'm not saying that they're an evil company or an evil corporation. That I feel like is a very silly thing to say about something, because there's been so many people that have run it during so many different times, and the landscape has shifted so drastically. It's really hard to say what's going on. There are, as with many other companies that have been around for 100 years, there's a few skeletons in the closet that, can't be completely ignored. But at the end of the day, that is life. People make mistakes, companies make mistakes. Sometimes they face the consequences, sometimes they don't. It is what it is. If you don't want to do business with them, you don't necessarily have to. There are alternatives, but the alternatives are limited because the current landscape is not as plentiful as it used to be. Because again, there's digital photography. And a company like Fuji recognized that, and that's why they've invested so heavily in their digital product line, because they've recognized that if we can make quality products there, we can grow with the times. All that to be said, I don't think Kodak currently is a monopoly. I think that they have a considerable, if not majority, if not maximal majority of the market share of film production. But I think that's by virtue of their years of experience doing so, specialized machinery, specialized skill set, specialized workers, and established contacts within the motion picture community. I don't think Kodak is a monopoly currently, even though in the past they have been one. The company's been around for 100 years. There's just going to be skeletons in the closet. All right, well, I'm going to wrap the video up there. Thank you very much for watching. This was a quick Spark Notes, Cliff Notes, what have you version of Kodak's history as being liable and all of those things. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, if I missed anything, I probably did. Again, links are down below to most of the things I talked about. I recommend you check those out. But if I did miss a thing, please leave that comment so you can help others. I'm not an expert on any of this, nor do I want to be. I just found it very interesting, and I received a lot of comments on my recent news videos that I wanted to follow up with a video. So I hope that this is illuminating for you as it was for me in the research process. Thank you very much again for watching. Appreciate it as always. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future content. And I will catch you on the next one.